Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where a single splinter can kill you, where your boss can legally beat you with a stick, and where the smell of animal glue boiling is your alarm clock. We're talking about medieval carpenter workshops, those cramped, freezing spaces where wooden cathedrals and peasant hovels alike were born from raw timber and sheer human suffering. You probably think you do just fine because you assembled an IKEA bookshelf once, maybe even without crying. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't make it past lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this community spread across time zones, some of you having breakfast while others are already dreaming. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's barely dawn, maybe 4:30 in the morning, and you're stumbling through narrow cobblestone streets that smell like a combination of wet hay, human waste, and wood smoke. The air is cold enough to make your breath fog, and you haven't had coffee because coffee won't reach Europe for another couple centuries. You're already off to a terrible start. Your modern body, used to alarm clocks you can snooze and thermostats you can adjust, is about to meet a workshop that operates on sunlight and suffers no complaints. The workshop itself is a timber-framed building, usually on the ground floor of the master carpenter's house, with shutters that swing open to let in what little light the medieval morning offers. You duck through a doorway so low you nearly crack your skull. Medieval people were shorter, sure, but they also just didn't waste lumber on generous ceiling heights. Inside, the space is maybe 20 by 30 feet, and every square inch is claimed by wood in various states of transformation. Planks lean against walls. Half-finished cart wheels sit in corners. Sawdust covers the packed earth floor in drifts that make you think of snow. Except the stuff gets into your lungs and stays there. The master carpenter is already present, of course, because he lives upstairs and has been awake since before you were born, metaphorically speaking. He's a man in his 40s, which makes him practically ancient by medieval standards, with hands like tree roots and a disposition somewhere between a disappointed father and a prison warden. He nods at you. That's your entire welcome. No orientation packet, no workplace safety video, no HR department to complain to if things go sideways. You're here to work, and the work starts immediately. Your eyes adjust to the dim interior, and you start noticing the tools. Oh, the tools. They're hanging on walls, lying on benches, stuck into beams, and every single one of them looks like it was designed to punish human flesh. There are axes with hand-forged iron heads, some for felling trees, others for shaping beams. There are adzes, which are basically axes with perpendicular blades, perfect for hollowing out wood or accidentally burying themselves in your shin. Chisels of every conceivable size, from delicate quarter-inchers to brutal 2-inch monsters that could double as weapons. Mallets made from dense hardwood, heavy enough to give you tendinitis after an hour of use. And then there are the saws. Medieval saws are nothing like the flimsy hardware store versions you're used to. These are thick-bladed, coarse-toothed instruments that require 2 people for the big cuts. 1 person in a pit below the log, 1 above, both of them pulling in rhythm for hours. The teeth are hand-filed and irregularly spaced, which means they bind and catch and sometimes send the whole blade jumping back at you. There's no safety guard, no automatic shutoff, no nothing. Just you, the saw, and the very real possibility of losing fingers before morning break. The master gestures to a pile of tools in the corner and tells you to sharpen them. In medieval workshops, tool maintenance isn't a sometimes thing, it's an every single day thing because dull tools are dangerous tools and dangerous tools kill apprentices, and dead apprentices are paperwork the guild doesn't appreciate. You pick up a chisel and a whetstone, and you immediately realize you have no idea what angle you're supposed to hold this thing at. 30 degrees? 20? 45? The master watches you fumble for exactly 4 seconds before walking over and physically moving your hands into position with the kind of rough impatience that says he's done this 1,000 times and has never enjoyed it once. You start pushing the chisel across the stone, and the scraping sound it makes is oddly satisfying, except your wrist starts aching after about 2 minutes. You've got 20 more tools to go. Welcome to medieval carpentry, where even the prep work is designed to break you. Historians still argue whether apprentices in this period were technically considered household members or more like indentured servants, but the practical difference is pretty slim. You belong to the master now. Your labor, your time, your body, all his, usually for 7 years, sometimes more. In exchange, you get food, a place to sleep, probably a straw mattress in a corner of the workshop, and training in a craft that might, if you survive and show talent, eventually earn you a spot in the guild. Might, no promises. The workshop smells like a combination of fresh-cut wood, old sweat, linseed oil, and something vaguely rancid you can't identify but will later learn is the hide glue pot that's been simmering since yesterday. It's not a pleasant smell, but it's not entirely unpleasant either. It's just thick, heavy, organic, the kind of smell that coats the inside of your nostrils and stays with you even when you leave. You'll smell like this workshop for the next 7 years. Your clothes, your hair, your skin, all of it infused with sawdust and wood tannins. Once the tools are sharp, or at least sharper than they were, the master hands you a broom. It's not a modern broom with synthetic bristles. It's a bundle of twigs bound to a stick, and it's about as effective as you'd expect. Your job is to sweep the floor, which sounds simple until you realize that sawdust, when packed down and mixed with dirt and moisture, basically becomes a kind of paste that resists all attempts at removal. You push the broom around for 20 minutes and succeed in mostly just redistributing the mess. But here's the thing, this is a test. The master is watching to see if you complain, if you slack off, if you show any sign that you think you're above menial labor. Because carpentry isn't just about cutting wood. It's about hierarchy, discipline, endurance. If you can't sweep a floor without whining, you'll never make it through the real work. And trust me, the real work is coming. Around you, the other apprentices and journeymen are starting to arrive. There's usually 1 or 2 other apprentices at various stages of training, plus maybe a journeyman or 2. Guys who've completed their apprenticeships but haven't yet saved enough money or gained enough reputation to open their own shops. They nod at you with expressions ranging from sympathy to amusement. They all remember their first day. They all remember thinking they'd survive. Some of them did. You notice one apprentice is missing half his left thumb. Nobody comments on it. Accidents happen. The master claps his hands once, and everyone stops what they're doing. He announces the day's work. A local merchant has commissioned a large chest, and there's also an ongoing project for the parish church. Some new choir stalls that need to be assembled. The chest is your project. Well, technically it's the master's project, but you'll be doing most of the grunt work while he handles the joinery and any decorative carving. He leads you to a stack of oak planks that have been air drying for approximately 2 years, because greenwood warps and splits, and nobody wants a chest that tears itself apart after 6 months. These planks are heavy. Each one is maybe 6 feet long, 18 inches wide, 2 inches thick, and weighs about as much as a medium-sized dog. Your job is to move them from the drying rack to the workbench. The distance is maybe 15 feet. It might as well be a mile. You grab the first plank and immediately understand that your gym membership and your ability to carry groceries from the car have prepared you for exactly nothing. This isn't evenly distributed weight. Oak is dense and awkward, and the plank wants to twist in your hands. You waddle across the workshop like a penguin with a surfboard, trying not to bash the plank into the apprentice working on a stool nearby. He doesn't look up. He's been hit by lumber before. It's part of the job. By the 3rd plank, your forearms are burning. By the 5th, you're genuinely considering whether this whole time travel experiment was a mistake. By the 8th, you've developed a blister on your palm that's already bleeding. The master notices, glances at your hand, and tosses you a rag. That's it. No bandage, no first aid kit, no sympathy. Just a rag that's probably been used to wipe down oily tools. You wrap your hand and keep going because stopping isn't an option. And here's a fun historical detail. Medieval carpenters didn't use gloves. Gloves reduce your grip and dexterity. And in a trade where precision matters, most craftsmen preferred calluses to protection. So your hands are going to blister, then callus, then blister again under the calluses, in a never-ending cycle of pain that eventually results in hands that feel like leather and look like they belong to someone 3 times your age. Once all the planks are moved, the master uses a piece of charcoal to mark cutting lines directly on the wood. No tape measures, no laser levels, just his eye, a straight edge, and decades of experience. He hands you a handsaw and points to the first line. Your job is to cut the plank to length. The saw is about 2 feet long with teeth like a shark's, and it weighs enough that just holding it at the correct angle makes your shoulder ache. You position the saw and start pushing. Nothing happens. You pull. The saw bites into the wood and promptly binds, stuck fast. You wiggle it free and try again, this time at a slightly different angle, and the saw skitters across the surface, leaving a scratch but no actual cut. The journeyman working nearby, a guy named Johann who smells like onions and has the personality of a wooden post, finally takes pity on you and shows you the proper stance. One knee on the plank to hold it steady, body angled so your arm moves in line with the cut, smooth strokes that let the saw's weight do most of the work. It helps. A little. You're still slow, still clumsy, and by the time you've made it halfway through the plank, your arm feels like it's going to fall off. The master walks by, glances at your work, and grunts. You're not sure if that's approval or resignation, but you'll take it. This is your life now. Moving wood, cutting wood, sharpening tools, sweeping floors, breathing sawdust, bleeding into rags, and wondering if you'll ever feel your lower back again. And this is just the first morning. You haven't even gotten to the part where things get truly dangerous. The sun is higher now, barely visible through the narrow windows, and the workshop is warming up from freezing to merely cold. Someone lights a small fire in the corner hearth, not for comfort, but to heat the glue pot and maybe warm some thin ale that passes for breakfast. You realize you're starving, but nobody's mentioned food yet, and you're not brave enough to ask. The master carpenter finally waves everyone toward a corner where a basket of dark bread and a jug of ale sit on a scarred wooden table. This is breakfast, and you've earned it through 2 hours of labor that started before the sun bothered to show up. The bread is the kind of dense, coarse loaf that could double as a doorstop, made from a mixture of rye and whatever cheaper grains were available, probably some barley, maybe some peas ground into the flour to stretch it further. It's not moldy, which apparently counts as a win. You tear off a chunk and immediately regret your enthusiasm, because this bread requires serious jaw strength. It's like chewing leather that's been left out in the rain and then baked into submission. The ale is weak, almost sweet, and room temperature. It's what everyone drinks because water from the local well is a dice roll with dysentery, and ale, even terrible ale, has been boiled during brewing, which kills most of the things that want to kill you. You drink it and try not to think about the fact that this is basically liquid bread with a faint alcoholic tingle that wouldn't impress anyone at a modern college party. But it's calories, and calories mean you might survive until lunch. Here's where you start understanding the hierarchy that governs every waking moment of your existence. The master eats first, taking the largest portion and the seat closest to the fire. Then the journeyman. There are 2 of them in this shop, Johann the onion-scented one, and another guy named Willem who has a scar running through his eyebrow and seems perpetually annoyed by everything. Then the senior apprentice, a kid maybe 16 years old who's been here for 5 years and acts like he owns the place relative to you. Then you, the fresh meat, the newcomer who gets whatever's left and should probably be grateful for it. Nobody talks much during the meal. Talking wastes time, and time is timber, and timber is money. The master swallows his bread, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and stands up. That's the signal. Breakfast is over. Everyone returns to their stations like soldiers responding to a silent command, and you scramble to follow because you're already learning that hesitation gets you noticed in bad ways. The master's control over you isn't just about work assignments. It's total. He decides when you eat, when you sleep, when you're allowed to leave the workshop, which is basically never without permission. If you get sick, he decides whether you see a physician or just tough it out. If you anger him, he can beat you, and it's not only legal but expected. The guild regulations actually specify that masters should discipline their apprentices physically when necessary to instill proper work habits and moral character. Historians still argue whether this system was paternalistic protection or straight-up exploitation, but from where you're standing, or rather aching, it feels a lot more like the latter. Your apprenticeship contract, which you or your parents signed before you showed up, binds you to this master for 7 years minimum. You can't quit. If you run away, the guild will track you down, fine your family, and return you to the workshop where you'll face punishment that makes the regular beatings look gentle. You can't marry without permission. You can't take on side work. You can't even learn from another carpenter without your master's approval. You are, in every practical sense, owned. In exchange, the master is obligated to teach you the craft, feed you, house you, and, theoretically, treat you as a member of his household. But household member, in medieval terms, doesn't mean family dinners and warm hugs. It means you're part of the economic unit, a resource to be used efficiently. The master has invested in you, he's feeding you after all, and food isn't cheap, so he's going to extract maximum value from your labor. If you happen to learn carpentry along the way, great. If not, well, he's still gotten 7 years of hauling and sweeping out of you. The guild system that governs all of this is supposed to ensure quality craftsmanship and fair treatment, but it's also a closed shop designed to limit competition. You can't just become a carpenter by being good at carpentry. You have to serve your apprenticeship, then work as a journeyman for several more years, then submit a masterpiece, a demonstration project that proves your skill, to the guild for approval. And even then, you need enough money to set up your own shop and buy into the guild, which can cost more than most people earn in several years. The system is rigged to keep the number of master craftsmen small and their profits high. And here's a quirky detail that really drives home how controlling this system is. In many medieval guilds, apprentices weren't allowed to have musical instruments in the workshop. Music was seen as a distraction, something that might lead to dancing or frivolity when you should be focused on mortise and tenon joints. Imagine that you're working 14-hour days in a sawdust-filled room, and they won't even let you whistle while you work because it might undermine discipline. The master's authority extends even to the sounds you're permitted to make. This morning's work continues with the chest project. The master has decided you're ready, or at least available, to help with some actual joinery, which sounds exciting until you realize it means holding boards in place while he does the skilled work. Your job is to be a human clamp. He's cutting a groove along the edge of one plank using a plow plane, which is a wooden tool with a blade that sticks out the bottom at a precise depth. It requires both hands and significant force to push through oak, which means he needs you to brace the board so it doesn't move. You press your weight against the plank, trying to keep it absolutely still against the workbench. The master pushes the plane, and you feel the board wanting to shift under the pressure. You push harder. Your legs start shaking from the effort. The master grunts, not at you, just the general grunt of a man doing hard physical labor, and continues planing. Shavings curl up from the blade, thin and perfect, falling to the floor in little spirals that would be beautiful if you weren't currently discovering muscles in your thighs you didn't know existed. This goes on for what feels like an hour but is probably 20 minutes. When the master finally finishes the groove, he doesn't thank you or acknowledge your effort. He just moves to the next board and you move with him. This is your value to him right now, your ballast, weight, and animate object that holds things steady. It's humbling in a way that your modern ego isn't prepared for. The workshop operates on an unspoken language of grunts, gestures, and expectations. The master rarely explains anything twice. If you don't understand an instruction, you'd better figure it out by watching, because asking too many questions marks you as stupid, and stupid apprentices don't advance. Johann, the journeyman, occasionally mutters a tip in your direction, but it's always phrased like criticism. You're holding that wrong is the closest you'll get to teaching. You adjust your grip. He walks away. Lesson delivered. Around mid-morning, a customer arrives. A merchant in decent clothing who wants to check on a cabinet the master is building for him. The master immediately transforms. His gruff demeanor softens into something approaching pleasantness. He wipes his hands on his apron, leads the merchant to where the cabinet is taking shape, and discusses the work with a level of patience and detail he's never shown you. You watch this performance and realize that the master has two modes: craftsman dealing with customers and tyrant dealing with apprentices. You're firmly in the second category. The merchant leaves satisfied, and the master's face hardens back into its default expression of vague disapproval. He points you toward a pile of wood scraps and tells you to sort them by size and type. This sounds straightforward until you realize you can't reliably tell oak from ash from beech by sight yet, and getting it wrong will earn you a cuff on the ear. You pick up pieces, examine the grain, smell them. Different woods have different scents, you're learning, and make your best guesses. You're probably wrong about half the time, but nobody corrects you, which means either you're doing okay or everyone's given up on you already. Lunchtime arrives with the same ceremony as breakfast. None. The master stops working, so everyone stops working. More bread appears, this time with a thin soup that contains what might be turnips and what might be regret. You eat it. It's warm, which is its primary virtue. The senior apprentice, his name is Peter, you've learned, though he hasn't actually spoken to you, tears his bread and dunks it in the soup, and you copy him because that seems to make the bread more edible. This meal happens in near silence again, except Willem the scarred journeyman makes a joke about the merchant who visited earlier, something about the man's wife and a too-wide cabinet, and the master chuckles. It's the first time you've heard him laugh. Then the moment passes, the master's face sets back into stone, and everyone returns to work. You're starting to understand that humor in this place is rationed, dispensed in tiny doses like medicine, just enough to remind everyone they're human but not so much that productivity suffers. The afternoon brings new torments. The master decides you need to learn to use an adze, which is the perpendicular bladed axe you noticed this morning. It's used for smoothing the surface of beams and hollowing out wood, and it's exactly as dangerous as it looks. He demonstrates on a log, standing with his legs apart so the adze swings between them, each stroke shaving off a curl of wood. It looks easy when he does it. Then he hands you the tool. The adze is heavier than you expected, weight concentrated in the iron head. You position yourself like the master showed you and take your first swing. The blade glances off the wood, nearly bounces back into your shin, and you stumble backward with your heart racing. The master sighs the sigh of a man who's watched 1,000 incompetent apprentices nearly maim themselves. He adjusts your stance, makes you practice the swing motion without actually hitting anything, then finally lets you try again. This time the blade bites into the wood properly, but your angle is wrong, and instead of a smooth shaving, you gouge out a chunk. The master doesn't say anything, just points at the log. Again, you swing. Another gouge. Again, swing. Gouge. Again, swing. This one's better, a thinner cut, more controlled. The master grunts and walks away to check on Peter's work. You keep swinging, and slowly, over the course of an hour, you start to get a feel for the rhythm, the angle, the way your whole body needs to move together. But here's the thing about medieval tool work. There's no quick learning curve. Modern power tools forgive small errors in technique because they're doing most of the work. Hand tools punish every mistake. A slightly wrong angle with a chisel means a ruined joint. Too much force with a saw means a bound blade. Not enough force means wasted time and exhausted arms with nothing to show for it. You need to develop not just strength but sensitivity, the ability to feel through the tool into the wood itself, reading the grain, sensing resistance, adjusting in real time. It takes months to get barely competent and years to get actually good. Your hands are destroyed. The blister from this morning has popped and bled through the rag you wrapped it with. New blisters are forming on your fingers from gripping tools. Your palms feel like they're on fire. When you mention this, just mentioned, not even complained, Johann laughed and said, "Wait until you get your first infected splinter. Then you'll know pain." He said it cheerfully, like he was describing a fun local tradition you had to look forward to. The hierarchy reveals itself in 100 small ways throughout the day. The master gets the best light at his workbench, positioned near the window. The journeymen get the next best spots. Apprentices work wherever there's space, often in corners where you're squinting to see your own hands. When a tool goes missing, the master accuses the apprentices first. When something breaks, the apprentices get blamed even if a journeyman did it. When there's not enough of the good wood, the apprentices make do with the knotty, twisted pieces that are harder to work. And yet, perversely, you're supposed to be grateful for all of this. The master is giving you a trade, a future, a chance to join the guild and maybe, eventually, have apprentices of your own to torment. Your parents probably paid him a fee to take you on, because apprenticeships aren't free, they're investments. The master invests his time and resources in you, and you invest your labor and suffering in return, and if everyone survives and the system works the way it's supposed to, you emerge 7 years later as a journeyman with actual skills. But standing here in your third hour of ads practice, arms shaking, hands bleeding, stomach growling despite the lunch you ate, you can't help wondering if the system is designed less to create skilled craftsmen and more to break young people down into obedient workers who'll accept any conditions because they've already invested too much suffering to quit. The master calls you over to help with assembly. The chest is starting to take shape. 4 sides that need to be joined at the corners using dovetail joints he spent the afternoon cutting. Your job is to hold pieces in position while he checks the fit, makes adjustments, and eventually taps them together with a mallet. You hold. He taps. The joint doesn't quite seat. He pulls it apart, shaves a tiny bit more wood. You hold again. He taps. Better. This happens 6 times per corner, for corners total. Your arms are numb by the end. As the light begins to fade, it's maybe 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but winter daylight is precious and brief. The master lights a few tallow candles. They smell like burning fat because that's exactly what they are, and they provide about as much light as a modern nightlight. Work continues anyway because stopping means lost productivity, and lost productivity means lost income. You're sent back to sweeping, collecting the day's accumulated sawdust and shavings. Some of this will be saved for the fire, some for mixing into glue as filler, and some will just be tossed into the alley behind the shop where it'll mix with everyone else's refuse. You sweep in the dim, flickering light, and you realize your entire body hurts in ways you've never experienced. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the deep, thorough ache of muscles worked past their limits, of hands ruined by unfamiliar labor, of a back bent over tasks it wasn't designed for. The master finally calls an end to the workday. It's been roughly 12 hours since you started, and you've accomplished. What? You moved some wood. You held some boards. You swung in adze badly for an hour. You swept. None of it feels like learning a craft. Feels like surviving barely. The next morning starts the same way the first one did, too early, too cold, too abrupt. Your body screams at you when you roll off the straw mattress in the corner of the workshop. Every muscle has an opinion about yesterday's labor, and that opinion is uniformly negative. Your hands are the worst. The blisters have gone from painful to agonizing overnight, and when you flex your fingers, you can feel the raw skin pulling and weeping. There's no time to baby them. The master is already moving around the shop, and you need to be upright and working before he notices you're slow. Today's primary task involves timber, raw, massive, unprocessed logs that need to be converted into usable planks. This is where you learn that medieval carpentry isn't just about delicate joinery and careful finishing. It's about brute strength and the kind of physical labor that would make modern construction workers weep into their energy drinks. The master has acquired several oak logs, each one roughly 12 feet long and maybe 2 feet in diameter. They were delivered yesterday by cart and dumped in the alley behind the workshop. Your job, along with Peter and one of the journeymen, is to get them inside and set up for processing. Oak is heavy, searingly, impossibly heavy. A cubic foot of green oak, meaning freshly cut, still full of moisture, weighs about 65 pounds. That log you're staring at? Probably close to 800 pounds of solid wood that needs to be rolled, lifted, and maneuvered through a doorway that's barely wide enough. There are no forklifts, no dollies, no mechanical advantage beyond simple wooden levers and your own rapidly failing muscles. The three of you gather around the first log. Willem, the scarred journeyman, takes charge because he's done this before and survived. He shows you how to roll the log using smaller logs as rollers underneath, a technique that's been around since people started building pyramids but doesn't feel any less exhausting for its historical pedigree. You push. The log rolls forward maybe a foot. You reposition the rollers. You push again. Another foot. The alley is muddy from recent rain, and the log keeps wanting to settle into the soft ground, which means every push is fighting both weight and suction. Your back discovers new ways to hurt. You're bent at an angle that concentrates all the force on your lower spine, and every push sends a jolt through your vertebrae that feels like it's rearranging your skeleton. Peter is breathing hard, his face red with effort. Willem just looks grimly determined, like this is simply what life is and complaining won't make the log lighter. 20 minutes later, you've moved the log maybe 15 feet. You have to do this 4 more times. By the time all the logs are inside the workshop, you're shaking. Not from cold, you're actually sweating despite the winter air, but from exhaustion so profound it's making your hands tremble. The master surveys the logs, nods once, and immediately announces that now they need to be set up in the soppet. Of course they do, because moving 800 pounds of oak wasn't enough of a workout. The soppet is exactly what it sounds like. A pit dug into the ground behind the workshop, maybe 6 feet deep and just wide enough for a person to stand in. A heavy wooden frame straddles the pit, and this is where the logs get positioned for the most grueling work in medieval carpentry. Hand-sawing timber into planks. This process is going to occupy most of your week, and by the end of it, you'll understand why sawyers were respected, well-paid, and often built like bears. The master and Willem use a combination of levers and ramps to get the first log positioned on the soppet frame. You and Peter help with the lifting, the steadying, the wedging of supports underneath, and by the time the log is secure, you've added several new splinters to your collection. One particularly nasty one has gone deep into the heel of your left hand, driven in when you slipped and caught yourself against the rough bark. You can feel it in there, a foreign presence that pulses with each heartbeat. You try to pull it out with your teeth, but it's too deep. It'll have to wait. Historians still argue whether the soppet method or the earlier sawing over beam technique was more common in different regions and time periods, but either way, the principle is the same. One person stands above the log, one below, and together you pull a massive 2-person saw through the entire length of the timber. The person on top guides the saw and has the easier job, relatively speaking. The person in the pit does most of the pulling and gets showered with sawdust for their trouble. Guess where you're going. You climb down into the pit, which smells like damp earth and old wood. The walls are shored up with planks, and the floor is covered in years' worth of accumulated sawdust that's composted into something with the consistency of potting soil. It's cold down here, darker, and you're suddenly very aware of how medieval this all is. You're standing in a hole in the ground, about to manually saw through oak, and if the log shifts wrong or the frame collapses, you'll be crushed. No safety regulations, no OSHA inspections, no emergency stop buttons. Willem positions himself on top of the log. The saw between you is a beast, about 6 feet long, with handles on both ends and teeth that look like they could chew through bone. The saw is set up so it only cuts on the downstroke, which means Willem pulls down and you guide it back up. Theoretically, the master has marked a line down the length of the log with a chalk string. This is where you're cutting, aiming for a plank about 2 inches thick. Precision matters because wasted wood is wasted money. Willem pulls. The saw bites into the oak and moves maybe 6 inches before binding. He pulls harder. You try to keep the saw vertical, try to add your strength to the pull, and the blade suddenly jerks free, drops another few inches, and catches again. This is going to be a long day. The rhythm develops slowly. Pull, recover, pull, recover. Each stroke removes a thin kerf of sawdust that falls directly onto your head, into your eyes, into your mouth if you're stupid enough to look up. You learn quickly to keep your mouth shut and breathe through your nose, but that just means your nostrils clog with sawdust instead. The dust gets everywhere. In your hair, down your collar, inside your ears. You're going to be finding sawdust in intimate places for days. After about an hour, you've cut maybe 3 feet. 9 feet to go. Your arms feel like they're going to detach from your shoulders. The repetitive motion of pulling the saw is murder on your trapezius muscles, your deltoids, your forearms. Everything burns. Willem up top seems tireless. He's done this before. His body has adapted, and more importantly, he's not breathing sawdust with every breath or standing in a cold pit that's slowly sapping the warmth from his legs. The master comes by periodically to check the cut, making sure you're following the line. At one point, he notices you've drifted slightly off course, maybe a 1/4 inch, and he's not pleased. He doesn't yell, doesn't even criticize directly, just makes a noise that conveys disappointment so profound you feel it in your chest. You correct the angle. The saw catches and binds. You work it free. Pull, recover, pull, recover. Here's a detail that really drives home how brutal this work is. Professional sawyers in the medieval period often worked in teams that would rotate positions. One pair would saw for an hour, then switch with another pair, because the work was simply too exhausting to maintain all day. But in a small workshop like this, there's no rotation. You and Willem are it. When you finish this log, there are 4 more waiting. And this is just to produce the raw planks. You still have to let them dry, plane them flat, and then actually build something with them. Around mid-morning, the master calls for a break. You climb out of the pit and discover that your legs have gone numb from standing on the cold, damp earth. You stumble when you try to walk, catching yourself on the pit's wooden frame, and Peter laughs. Not cruelly, really, more the laugh of someone who remembers his own first week in the sawpit and is just glad he's graduated to different tortures. Breakfast is the same bread and weak ale, but you've never been more grateful for calories in your life. You sit on the ground outside the workshop in a patch of weak winter sunlight, and you can feel the sawdust starting to itch under your clothes. Your scalp itches. Your neck itches. You reach under your shirt to scratch and come away with a handful of fine wood particles that look like brown snow. The splinter in your palm is throbbing now. You mention it to Johann, who's eating his bread nearby, and he shrugs. "Leave it," he says. "It'll work its way out or fester. If it festers, we'll dig it out." This is apparently the extent of medieval first aid philosophy. Wait and see if you die from it. You probe the area around the splinter, and yes, it definitely feels hot, slightly swollen. Infection is setting in. Johann sees you poking at it and adds, "Don't dig at it with dirty hands. That's how Thomas lost his finger last year. Thomas, you learn, was an apprentice who tried to remove a splinter with a knife he just used to cut through resin-covered wood. The wound went septic, the infection spread, and a barber surgeon eventually amputated the finger at the second knuckle. Thomas finished his apprenticeship, but he'll never be as good a carpenter with that hand compromised. The guild approved him anyway, out of pity maybe, and he now makes simple furniture in a small shop across town. This story is told without drama, just as a statement of fact. Injuries happen. Sometimes they're minor, sometimes they change your life, and you deal with it because what else are you going to do? The concept of workers' compensation or disability benefits won't exist for centuries. If you're maimed, you're on your own. Back in the pit. The afternoon session is worse than the morning because your muscles haven't recovered. They've just stiffened. The saw feels heavier. Your grip keeps slipping because your blisters have torn open and the saw handle is slick with fluid that might be blood. Might be plasma, probably both. You wrap the handle with a strip of cloth torn from your already disintegrating shirt, and it helps marginally. Willem is replaced by the master for a few hours, which changes the dynamic. The master is stronger, more experienced, and has zero patience for imperfect saw lines. He barks corrections from above. Left, you're drifting left, and you adjust, overcorrect, adjust again. The saw binds more frequently because oak is difficult wood, full of knots and density variations that catch the blade. Each time it binds, you have to work the saw back and forth to free it, which wastes time and energy you don't have to spare. There's a meditative quality to the work, though you wouldn't call it pleasant. It's more like the meditation of extreme discomfort, where your mind detaches slightly from your body because your body has nothing good to report. You fall into a rhythm that's almost trance-like. Pull, recover, breathe, pull, recover, breathe. The sawdust continues to rain down. Your world narrows to the immediate. The saw handle in your hands, the resistance of the oak, the burning in your muscles, the splinter pulsing in your palm like a tiny second heartbeat. By late afternoon, you've finished the first log. One complete log, sawed into 6 planks, each about 2 inches thick. Took most of the day. You have 4 more logs to go, which means 4 more days of this at minimum, assuming you don't slow down further as your body gives up on life. You climb out of the pit and your legs nearly buckle. Everything hurts. Not the temporary hurt of a good workout, but the deep structural hurt of tissue damage and joints pushed past their design specifications. The master inspects the planks, running his hand along the cuts, checking for straightness. He finds a section where the saw wandered, creating a slight curve in one plank. He points this out to you without comment, and you understand that this is a failure, a mark against your competence. Never mind that this is your first day sawing, that your hands are shredded, that you've been breathing sawdust for 8 hours. The standard is perfection, and you're not meeting it. Dinner happens. More bread, this time with a chunk of hard cheese that tastes like salt and regret. You eat it anyway because your body is screaming for protein. The other apprentices and journeymen are discussing the next day's work. Something about a rush order for door frames that needs to be finished before the weekend. You're not paying much attention. You're too focused on the splinter, which has gone from throbbing to actively painful. The skin around it is definitely inflamed now, red and hot to the touch. You show it to the master after dinner. He glances at it, says, and tells you to soak your hand in warm salt water before bed. This is apparently the medieval cure for everything salt water. It might actually help reduce infection, or it might just be tradition, but you're in no position to argue. You find a bowl, heat some water over the fire, add salt from the workshop supply, and stick your hand in. The salt stings like fury, making you hiss through your teeth, but you keep your hand submerged because the alternative is losing a finger like Thomas. As you sit there, hand in a bowl of salt water that's turning pink from your various open wounds, watching the other workshop members prepare for sleep, you realize something fundamental. Medieval carpentry isn't a craft you learn. It's a transformation you survive. The work doesn't just teach you skills, it physically rebuilds you. Your hands will either callous into tools themselves or fail and force you out of the trade. Your back will either adapt to the constant strain or break. Your lungs will either learn to filter sawdust or develop the chronic cough that kills old carpenters in their 50s. This isn't education. It's evolution by attrition. The workshop goes quiet. People find their sleeping spots. The journeymen have slightly better accommodations in an adjacent room, while you and Peter are back on your straw mattresses in the corner. The master retreats upstairs to his actual living quarters, where presumably there are real beds and blankets that don't smell like wood shavings. You lie down, and your body provides a comprehensive report of all the ways it's been damaged today. Your back spasms. Your shoulders ache. Your hands throb. The splinter has its own rhythm of pain, separate from everything else. And tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. And the day after that, for 7 years. 3 days into sawing logs, something shifts in your brain. Not acceptance exactly, more like a grim resignation that this is simply what life is now. A daily cycle of physical destruction punctuated by inadequate meals and fitful sleep. The splinter in your palm worked its way out on day 2, leaving behind a small infected pocket that you've been diligently soaking in salt water. Is healing, though the skin around it is still angry and red. You've also developed a new collection of injuries. A deep bruise on your shin from where a log rolled wrong, a cut across your forearm from a sharp edge you didn't see in the dim light, and a persistent pain in your lower back that feels like someone's driving nails into your spine. But today brings a change in routine. The master has decided you've suffered enough in the soffit, or more likely, he needs the planks you've produced to start drying and wants to move on to other projects. He assigns you to joinery work, which sounds like a promotion until you realize it's actually just a different flavor of torture. Today you're going to learn about mortise and tenon joints, the bread and butter of medieval woodworking, and you're going to learn by doing the most tedious, precision-demanding, mind-numbing work imaginable. A mortise and tenon joint is elegantly simple in concept. You cut a rectangular hole in one piece of wood and a matching rectangular protrusion on another piece, then fit them together. It's been used for thousands of years in everything from furniture to buildings to ships. It's also absolutely unforgiving of error. If your mortise is too wide, the joint is loose and weak. Too narrow, and the tenon won't fit. Too deep, and you weaken the surrounding wood. Too shallow, and the joint won't seat properly. You need accuracy within maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and you're achieving this with hand tools, tired arms, and eyes that are still watering from yesterday's sawdust. The master shows you how to mark out a mortise using a marking gauge, a wooden tool with an adjustable metal pin that scratches a line parallel to the edge of the board. He does it once, his hands steady and sure, the lines appearing exactly where he wants them. Then he hands you the gauge and a piece of oak that's destined to become part of a table frame. Your job is to mark out 6 mortises, evenly spaced along the length of the board. You press the gauge against the wood and push. The pin skitters across the surface, leaving a wobbly line that looks like it was drawn by someone having a seizure. The master's expression doesn't change, but you can feel his disappointment radiating like heat from a forge. He takes the gauge, repositions your hands. His fingers are rough and calloused, like holding tools shaped from horn, and guides you through the motion again. This time the line is better, straighter. He releases your hands and steps back. You're on your own. The marking takes an hour. Each mortise requires 4 lines, 2 for the width, 2 for the length, and each line needs to be precisely placed. You measure with a ruler, make a mark, position the gauge, scratch the line, check it, realize it's wrong, sand it out, start again. The master walks by periodically, glances at your work, and occasionally makes a small sound that could be approval or could be gas. You can't tell. Once the mortises are marked, the real work begins. Cutting them out. This involves a mortise chisel. A thick, heavy chisel designed to withstand the punishment of being driven into hardwood with a mallet, and a level of focus you haven't needed since you took the SATs. The technique is to start in the middle of the mortise, chisel out small chunks of wood, and gradually work toward the edges, creating a rectangular hole that goes through most of the thickness of the board but not quite all the way through. You flip the board and do the same from the other side, meeting in the middle. Theoretically, you position the chisel at the center of your first marked mortise, hold it vertical, and strike it with the mallet. The chisel sinks maybe 1/8 of an inch into the oak. You strike again, another 1/8 inch. Again, the repetitive motion is hypnotic. Position, strike, lever out the chip, reposition, strike. After maybe 50 strikes, you've removed a chunk about the size of your thumbnail. You have 5.5 more mortises to go. Your right shoulder, the one doing the mallet work, starts to ache within 20 minutes. The impact of mallet striking chisel travels up your arm like a shockwave, and after 100 strikes, your whole arm is vibrating with a low-level pain that never quite subsides. You switch hands, using your left to strike for a while, but your left arm is weaker and less coordinated, so the strikes are less effective. You switch back. Your right shoulder accepts its fate. Here's where the precision becomes critical. The walls of the mortise need to be straight and vertical. If you angle the chisel even slightly, you'll create a mortise that's wider at the top than the bottom, or vice versa, and the tenon won't fit properly. So you have to constantly check that you're holding the chisel exactly perpendicular to the surface. You use your eyes, you use a small square the master provides, you use prayer. Still, your first mortise ends up with one wall that slopes inward because your tired arms couldn't maintain the angle. The master inspects it, shakes his head, and tells you to start over on a new piece of wood. This one is ruined. Well, not completely ruined. It could be used for something less demanding, but not for the table frame that requires structural integrity. You've just wasted an hour and a piece of oak that took 3 days to produce. You feel this failure physically, like a weight in your stomach. You start the second mortise with renewed focus born of humiliation. This time you check the chisel angle obsessively, paranoid about every strike. The mortise progresses slowly, but the walls are straighter. You work for 2 hours on this single hole, and when you're done, the master examines it, tests the fit with a sample tenon he's cut, and grunts. That's approval. That grunt is the highest praise you've received all week, and you're pathetically grateful for it. Historians still argue whether medieval apprentices were actually taught the theoretical principles behind their crafts or if they learned purely by imitation and trial and error. But from your position here, elbow deep in with chips and frustration, it feels entirely like the latter. The master never explains why the mortise needs to be exactly this depth or why the walls need to be precisely vertical. He just shows you what right looks like and expects you to figure out how to achieve it. If you fail, you waste materials and earn disapproval. If you succeed, you're allowed to continue existing in the workshop. There's no middle ground, no partial credit, no A for effort. The day grinds forward. You cut another mortise, then another. By the fourth one, your hands have developed a muscle memory for the motion, position, strike, lever, reposition. Your shoulder has moved beyond pain into a kind of numb acceptance. You're not enjoying this, but you're achieving something approaching competence, which is its own small victory. Lunch arrives. More bread, this time with a thin stew that contains actual chunks of meat. Probably mutton, stringy and tough, but protein nonetheless. You chew slowly, partly because the meat requires serious jaw work, and partly because eating fast on an empty stomach leads to cramping. The master announces that there's a guild meeting tomorrow evening, which means the workshop will close early. This causes a small ripple of excitement among the journeymen. Early closure means free time, maybe a visit to a tavern, maybe just the luxury of sleeping before total exhaustion sets in. You won't be going to the guild meeting, of course. Apprentices aren't members. You're not even fully human in the guild's eyes. More like proto-craftsmen who might someday evolve into the real thing if you survive long enough and prove worthy. The meeting will discuss guild business, pricing structures, quality standards, who's allowed to take on new apprentices, disputes between masters. It's the governing body of the craft, and you're not invited. After lunch, the master decides you're ready to try cutting a tenon, the male counterpart to the mortise you've been hacking out all morning. Tenons are cut on the end of a board and require a different set of skills. You need to saw carefully down to a marked line, creating shoulders on all four sides, leaving a rectangular protrusion that will fit snugly into the mortise. The challenge is keeping all your cuts straight and stopping exactly at the shoulder line. Too deep and you weaken the tenon. Not deep enough and it won't seat properly. The master marks out a tenon for you on a piece of ash, softer than oak, slightly more forgiving, which you appreciate. You're using a tenon saw which is shorter than the pit saw and has a reinforced back edge to keep it rigid. The saw feels delicate in your ruined hands, almost toy-like after days of wrestling with the massive pit saw. You position the saw at the edge of the board and begin cutting, trying to follow the marked line. The saw wants to drift. You correct. It drifts the other way. You correct again. By the time you've cut an inch deep, your line looks like a snake having a seizure. The master watches for about 30 seconds, then stops you. He doesn't say anything, just takes the saw and demonstrates again. Smooth, controlled strokes that follow the line perfectly. He hands the saw back. You try again. This time it's slightly better. Only slightly. The problem is that your hands have no fine motor control left. Days of heavy labor have left them swollen, stiff, and incapable of the delicate touch that precision sawing requires. You're gripping the saw too tightly, overcompensating for weakness with tension, and that tension makes your cuts jerky and imprecise. It's a vicious cycle. The more frustrated you get, the tighter you grip, the worse your cuts become. You spend the afternoon destroying pieces of ash. The master gives you scrap wood to practice on, which is both a mercy and a humiliation. He doesn't trust you with good materials anymore. You cut tenons, examine them, see all the ways they're wrong, and start over. The workshop fills with the sound of your sawing, a rhythmic rasping that becomes the soundtrack to your failure. Around mid-afternoon, something clicks. Not a dramatic improvement, but a small shift in understanding. You realize that you're fighting the saw, trying to force it to follow the line, when you should be guiding it, letting the teeth do the work while you just provide direction. You relax your grip slightly, focus on smooth strokes rather than forceful ones, and suddenly the saw tracks better. The cut is straighter. It's still not perfect. You're not suddenly a master craftsman, but it's progress. The master notices. He comes over, examines your latest attempt, and for the first time all day, his expression softens slightly. Better, he says. One word. Better. You're absurdly pleased, grinning like an idiot at this tiny scrap of approval, and you realize how completely this place has recalibrated your expectations. A week ago, you would have expected praise for effort. Now you're grateful for a single word acknowledging that you're slightly less incompetent than before. As the afternoon light begins to fade, the master sets you to work on a different task. Fitting the joints you've made. Or rather, fitting the joints he's made with the mortises you've cut, because your tenons still aren't good enough for actual use. He's created a small frame, 2 vertical pieces with mortises, 2 horizontal pieces with tenons, and your job is to test fit everything, make adjustments where needed, and prepare for final assembly. You take the first tenon and try to insert it into its mortise. It doesn't fit. The tenon is fractionally too large, binding before it's even halfway in. You need to pare it down, which means more chisel work, carefully shaving thin slices from the tenon surface until it achieves the right size. This is painstaking work that requires a light touch and a sharp chisel. Your chisel is sharp, the master maintains his tools obsessively, but your touch is anything but light. You clamp the tenon in a vise and begin paring. The first stroke removes too much wood. The second stroke is too timid and removes almost nothing. You're hunting for a middle ground, a Goldilocks zone of just enough pressure, and it takes you 20 minutes of micro-adjustments to get the tenon to fit properly. When it finally slides into the mortise with a satisfying friction fit, tight enough to hold but not so tight it requires hammering, you feel a small surge of accomplishment. Then the master tells you to do the other 3 corners. Of course, the process repeats 3 more times, each joint requiring its own custom fitting because nothing is perfectly uniform when everything's done by hand. One mortise is slightly too narrow and needs to be widened with careful chisel work. Another tenon has a corner that's not quite square and needs to be trimmed. It's puzzle solving with wood, except every piece is unique and there's no picture on the box to guide you. By the time you finish fitting all 4 joints, the light is almost gone and your hands are shaking from fine motor fatigue. The master examines the frame, testing each joint, checking for gaps, and finally nods. "Good enough," he says. "Not good. Good enough. But you'll take it." Dinner is quieter than usual. The journeymen are excited about tomorrow's early closure, making plans for their evening. The master seems preoccupied with guild business. Peter is nursing a smashed thumbnail. He caught it between 2 boards earlier and the nail has gone purple-black. You eat your bread and try not to think about how many more days, weeks, months, years of this lie ahead. Your body has started adapting in small ways. Your hands, despite their wounds, are beginning to develop calluses in the right places. Your back still hurts, but it's a familiar hurt now, manageable. Your arms are getting stronger. You can feel it in the way yesterday's impossible tasks are today's merely exhausting tasks. You're not thriving, but you're surviving, and in a medieval workshop, that counts as success. After dinner, the master calls you over and hands you a small project of your own. A practice piece, a simple joint that you're to cut and fit on your own, no help, no supervision. It's a test. You take the marked pieces of wood back to your corner and set to work by candlelight, your shadow huge and flickering on the workshop wall. The chisel in your hand feels slightly less foreign now, more like an extension of your will than a hostile instrument. You work slowly, checking every angle, every measurement. The mortise takes an hour. The tenon takes another hour. The fitting and adjustment take yet another hour. By the time you're done, everyone else has gone to sleep, and you're working in near silence, just the sound of your breathing and the occasional scrape of tool on wood. The joint fits. Not perfectly, there's a tiny gap on one side, but it fits. It holds together. It's a real joint, functional if not beautiful. You set it aside for the master to inspect in the morning, and you lie down on your straw mattress with the profound satisfaction of someone who's accomplished something actual, something tangible. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new pains, new failures. But tonight, you've made something that works. Your hands are destroyed, your body is wrecked, and your future stretches ahead like an endless corridor of sawdust and suffering. But you've made a joint that holds. The workshop wakes to a peculiar smell, sharper than the usual wood and sweat combination, with an acrid chemical edge that makes your nose wrinkle. You sit up on your straw mattress and realize the smell is coming from the corner where the master has set up a small brazier. Next to it sits a battered iron pot, and inside that pot is something that looks like it came from a nightmare. A bubbling, viscous liquid the color of weak tea, with chunks of something pale floating in it. This is hide glue, and you're about to become intimately familiar with both its usefulness and its absolute foulness. The master is stirring the pot with a stick, watching the contents with the focused attention of a chef preparing a delicate sauce. Except this isn't cuisine, it's rendered animal parts, specifically the collagen-rich bits like hooves, hides, and bones that have been boiled down into a protein-based adhesive. When hot, hide glue is liquid and workable. When it cools, it sets into a bond that's strong enough to hold furniture together for centuries. It's also one of the most revolting substances you'll ever work with, and you're going to spend the morning covered in it. "Come here," the master says, and you approach the pot with appropriate caution. Up close, the smell is overwhelming. Imagine a combination of wet dog, old leather, and something died and we found it 3 days later. You try breathing through your mouth, but that just means you can taste it. The master dips a brush into the glue and shows you the consistency he's looking for. Thick enough to stay on the brush, but thin enough to flow into joints. Too thick and it won't penetrate properly. Too thin and it won't bond. He's been making glue for 30 years, and he can judge it by sight and smell. Your job today is to help assemble the table frame you've been working on all week. The joints have been cut and fitted, and now they need to be glued and clamped while the glue sets. This sounds straightforward until you realize that hide glue starts setting within minutes of application, which means you need to work fast, and working fast with precision is exactly what your exhausted brain and battered hands are worst at. The master lays out all the pieces of the frame on the workbench. He's already done a dry fit, assembled it without glue to make sure everything works, and now comes the real thing. He hands you a brush, which is really just a bundle of stiff bristles tied to a stick, and tells you to apply glue to the mortises while he applies it to the tenons. You dip the brush into the pot, and the glue comes out in stringy, gloopy strands that look like something you'd find in a haunted house. You daub glue into the first mortise, trying to coat all the surfaces evenly. The glue is hot, not scalding, but uncomfortably warm against your already damaged hands. It drips down the side of the board, and you try to catch it with the brush, which just spreads it around. The master is working with infuriating efficiency, coating his tenons with smooth, even strokes, no drips, no waste. You're making a mess. "Faster," the master says, not looking up from his work. The glue is already starting to cool and thicken. You speed up, sacrificing neatness for speed, and manage to get glue into all 4 mortises before the master finishes with his tenons. He immediately starts fitting the joints together, tapping them with a mallet to seat them fully. You help guide the pieces, trying to keep everything square while glue squeezes out of the joints like some kind of biological discharge. The frame goes together in maybe 3 minutes of controlled chaos. Once it's assembled, the master produces several wooden clamps, hand-carved affairs with threaded screws, and begins applying pressure to the joints. You hold the frame steady while he cranks the clamps tight, and you can see glue oozing out of every joint. This is actually good. It means the joints are fully filled, but it also means cleanup is going to be tedious. The excess glue needs to be wiped away before it fully sets, but not immediately while it's still liquid. You have to wait until it reaches a gel-like consistency, then scrape it off with a chisel or a damp cloth. Too early and you just smear it around. Too late and it's rock hard and needs to be chiseled off, risking damage to the wood. The master shows you the timing, waiting until the glue has the consistency of jelly, then wiping it away with a wet rag. It comes off in rubbery strings that stick to everything they touch. You spend the next hour cleaning glue squeeze out from every joint on the frame, and in the process you get glue on your hands, your clothes, your face somehow, and definitely in your hair. Hide glue, you discover, is incredibly sticky when it's at the right temperature. It bonds to skin with disturbing enthusiasm, and peeling it off feels like removing the world's most aggressive band-aid. By the time you're done, your hands have a translucent coating of dried glue that makes them look reptilian. While the frame sets, it needs at least a day before it can be moved or stressed. The master decides you should learn about finishes. Medieval furniture wasn't left raw. It was treated with various substances to protect the wood, enhance its appearance, and sometimes add color. Some of these treatments are relatively benign. Others are actively trying to kill you. The simplest finish is oil, usually linseed oil, pressed from flax seeds, which soaks into the wood and provides a subtle sheen while protecting against moisture. The master shows you how to apply it. Pour a small amount onto a cloth, rub it into the wood following the grain, let it penetrate, wipe off the excess. It's almost meditative work, and the oil actually smells pleasant, nutty, and earthy. You're applying oil to a small cabinet door, working the finish into the oak, and for the first time in days, you're doing something that doesn't actively hurt. But then the master introduces you to the other finishes, and your brief moment of peace evaporates. He shows you a pot of paint, a deep red-brown color that looks almost appetizing until he explains what's in it. The base is linseed oil, sure, but the pigment is red lead oxide. Lead. You're about to paint furniture with a toxic heavy metal that causes everything from kidney damage to neurological problems to death if you're exposed to enough of it. Don't eat while you're working with this, the master says, which is his version of a safety lecture. And wash your hands after. That's it. That's the full extent of precautions against lead poisoning. No gloves, no masks, no ventilation beyond the open shutters. Just don't eat the paint and hope for the best. You dip a brush into the lead paint and start applying it to a chest panel the master is decorating. The paint goes on smoothly, covering the wood with an opaque layer of color that's genuinely beautiful, rich and deep and even. You can see why people use this stuff. It's also drying on your hands, leaving your skin with a faint reddish tint that you're absolutely certain is leaching directly into your bloodstream. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen understood the dangers of the materials they worked with or simply accepted toxicity as part of life. But either way, you're breathing lead dust every time you sand the dried paint between coats, which is apparently something you'll be doing later. The master mentions that old Hendrik, who used to run a workshop across town, died last year of some kind of tremor disease that left him shaking and confused. You're starting to suspect Hendrik worked with a lot of lead paint. After an hour of painting, your head feels slightly fuzzy in a way that might be lead exposure or might just be lack of food and sleep. It's hard to tell. The master notices you swaying slightly and tells you to take a break, go outside, get some air. You stumble into the alley behind the workshop and breathe deeply, trying to clear your lungs of fumes. The cold air helps, shocking your system back into alertness. While you're outside, you notice Willem dumping something from a bucket. More glue, you think old batch that's gone bad. It hits the mud with a splat and immediately attracts flies, even in the cold. The alley is basically the workshop's dumping ground for everything that can't be burned or reused. With scraps too small to save, broken tools waiting for the metal to be salvaged, piles of shavings and sawdust, and apparently buckets of spoiled glue. The smell is complex. Wood rot, animal decay, human waste from the nearby houses, all mixing into a medieval perfume that follows you everywhere. Back inside, the master has a new task. You're going to make wood filler. This is what gets packed into gaps, cracks, and imperfections before finishing. The recipe is simple. Take sawdust, mix it with hide glue until you get a paste, and apply it while it's still workable. You're using sawdust from oak, which means the filler will match the oak pieces you're repairing. The master shows you the ratio, about 3 parts sawdust to 1 part glue, and turns you loose. You scoop sawdust from the floor, which feels vaguely unsanitary but is apparently standard practice, and mix it with glue in a small bowl. The resulting paste looks like something you'd find in a diaper, but it works remarkably well. You pack it into a crack in one of the table frame's boards, smooth it flush with your finger, and step back. Once it dries, it'll be nearly invisible, especially after staining. It's a clever solution to an eternal problem. Wood has defects, and craftsmen need to hide them. The morning progresses through a series of finishing tasks. You apply more oil to various pieces, careful to follow the grain, working the finish into the wood. You sand dried paint with a block of sandstone, There's no sandpaper yet, just literal stone that abrades the surface, and try not to breathe the resulting dust, which is definitely lead contaminated and definitely terrible for you. You mix more wood filler, filling gaps and imperfections, smoothing the paste with tools and fingers until your hands are coated in a mixture of glue and sawdust that hardens into a second skin. Lunch arrives, and you remember the master's warning about not eating while working with lead. You try to wash your hands in a bucket of water, scrubbing with a rag, but the lead paint has stained your skin, and you're not sure if you've removed the toxic residue or just spread it around. You eat your bread carefully, trying not to touch it more than necessary, and wonder how many years of exposure it takes before you start developing Hendrix tremors. The afternoon brings a new finishing technique, milk paint. This is safer than lead paint. It's basically milk protein mixed with lime and pigments derived from earth and plants, but it's also more finicky. The master is mixing a batch for a customer who wants a pale blue cabinet, and you're enlisted to help. The pigment is something called woad, a plant-based blue dye that's been used since ancient times. Mixed with the milk lime base, it creates a soft, chalky blue that looks almost modern in its simplicity. Applying milk paint is different from oil-based paint. It's thinner, more watery, and it soaks into the wood rather than sitting on top of it. You need multiple coats to build up opacity, and each coat needs to dry before the next one goes on. You brush the first coat onto the cabinet panels, and the paint practically disappears into the wood, leaving just a faint blue tint. The master says you'll need 4 or 5 coats. This cabinet is going to take days to finish. While the first coat dries, the master decides you should learn about wax finishing. This is the final step for many pieces. After oil or paint, a thin layer of beeswax is buffed into the surface to provide protection and a subtle sheen. The wax comes in a solid block that smells sweet and clean, a welcome change from hide glue and lead paint. You scrape off a small amount with a knife, warm it slightly by holding it near the brazier, and rub it into a finished stool the master has been working on. The wax goes on cloudy and then clears as you buff it with a cloth, rubbing in circles until your arm aches and the wood glows with a soft luster. It's satisfying work, watching the finish transform under your hands, seeing the grain pop and the color deepen. This is what all the earlier suffering was for, this moment when raw timber becomes something beautiful and functional. You can almost understand why someone would choose this life voluntarily. Almost. By late afternoon, you've been exposed to so many different fumes and chemicals that you're not entirely sure which ones are making you dizzy. The hide glue smell has become background noise, hardly noticeable anymore, which probably means your olfactory nerves have given up. The lead paint has left your hands stained and your head foggy. The linseed oil has soaked into your clothes, and you smell like you've been deep frying wood. The milk paint is the least offensive, but it's gotten under your fingernails in a way that's going to take days to clean out. The master surveys the day's work. The glued frame clamped and setting, the oil-finished pieces drying, the painted panels with their toxic, beautiful colors, the wax-buffed stool glowing in the fading light. He nods, satisfied with the progress, and you feel a small glow of accomplishment that you've contributed to this without completely destroying anything. Then he points to the glue pot and tells you to clean it. Of course, the pot is crusted with dried glue, and your job is to scrape it out, add fresh water and fresh materials, and get tomorrow's batch started. You chip away at the hardened glue with a stick, trying not to gag at the smell of old animal protein that's been cooking on and off for days. The chunks come off in pieces, and you dump them into the refuse bucket. Tomorrow you'll do this all again. More glue, more finishes, more exposure to substances that are slowly poisoning you in ways you won't understand for centuries. But tonight, you're alive, your hands still work, and you've learned something real about turning wood into objects that will outlast you. That has to count for something. The guild meeting happens without you, of course, but its effects ripple through the workshop the next morning like a stone thrown into still water. The master returns from the evening gathering with a tight expression and a new set of concerns that he immediately makes your problem. Apparently, another master carpenter 2 streets over has been caught selling furniture below the guild's minimum prices, undercutting everyone else to steal customers. The guild has fined him, confiscated some of his work, and issued a warning that next time he'll lose his membership entirely. This matters to you because the master is now paranoid about anyone seeing his techniques, his prices, his business dealings, anything that might give competitors an advantage or provide evidence of guild violations. You're sweeping the floor when the master pulls you aside and delivers what amounts to a loyalty oath disguised as a casual conversation. He explains, in terms that are friendly but carry an unmistakable threat, that what happens in this workshop stays in this workshop. The techniques you learn, the joinery methods he uses, the sources of his timber, the prices he charges customers. All of this is proprietary information protected by guild regulations and master-apprentice confidentiality. If you talk about these things to outsiders, especially to other carpenters or their apprentices, you're violating your contract and potentially damaging his business. The punishment for such violations isn't spelled out explicitly, but the master mentions in passing that Thomas, remember him, the apprentice who lost his finger, had his contract terminated early after he was caught sharing information with a friend who worked for a competing shop. Thomas finished his apprenticeship elsewhere, but the mark on his reputation meant no master would take him on for journeyman work. He ended up making simple stools and boxes in a tiny shop that barely keeps him fed. The message is clear. Loyalty isn't optional, and betrayal has consequences that extend far beyond your time in this workshop. This obsession with secrecy isn't just paranoia. It's the entire foundation of the guild system. Medieval craft guilds operated as closed monopolies, controlling who could practice a trade, where they could practice it, what they could charge, and what standards their work had to meet. In theory, this ensured quality and fair competition. In practice, it created an environment where information became currency and knowledge became power. A master who developed a particularly clever joinery technique or found a reliable source of cheap timber had a competitive advantage, and he guarded that advantage like a dragon guarding gold. The secrecy extends to surprising details. You're not supposed to discuss how many apprentices the master has, because that reveals his workshop capacity. You can't mention specific customers, because other masters might try to poach them. You definitely can't share the master's pricing structure, because that's information competitors could use to undercut him. Even admitting what type of wood the master prefers for certain projects could be problematic if it reveals supplier relationships or quality judgments that others might exploit. Historians still argue whether this guild secrecy ultimately helped or hindered technological advancement in medieval crafts, but from where you're standing, being threatened with professional ruin before you even have a profession, it mostly just feels stifling. You're learning carpentry in an environment where asking too many questions makes you suspect and talking about your work makes you a traitor. It's education through osmosis and intimidation, where the explicit lesson is with joinery but the implicit lesson is keep your mouth shut. The morning's work involves a task that really drives home the competitive paranoia. You're helping to build a specialized jig for cutting a particular style of decorative molding. This jig is apparently the master's own design, developed over years of experimentation, and it allows him to produce this molding faster and more consistently than other carpenters. The jig itself is just a wooden frame with guides and stops that hold the workpiece at specific angles, but it represents intellectual property in a world without patents or copyrights. The master's competitive edge is literally made of wood, and it's your job to help maintain it. You're cutting pieces for the jig under the master's close supervision. He's paranoid about the measurements being recorded or remembered, so instead of giving you numerical dimensions, he uses a story stick, a piece of wood with the measurements marked directly on it. No numbers, no units, just physical marks that you transfer to the workpieces. This way, even if you left tomorrow and joined a competing shop, You couldn't recreate the jig from memory because you never knew the actual measurements. It's security through obscurity, medieval style. The work is tedious and precise. Each piece of the jig needs to fit together perfectly, and the angles need to be exact or the whole system fails. You're cutting, fitting, adjusting, recutting, and throughout it all, the master is watching you with an intensity that makes your hands shake. He's not just supervising your work, he's monitoring you for signs that you're paying too much attention, trying to memorize details you shouldn't. It's exhausting being distrusted while simultaneously being expected to learn. Around mid-morning, another carpenter drops by. A colleague of the master's, apparently, though not exactly a friend. They exchange pleasantries that are so carefully neutral they might as well be insults, and then they retire to the corner of the workshop for a conversation that you're explicitly told to ignore. You keep working on the jig, but you can't help overhearing snatches of their discussion. They're talking about timber prices, about a shipment that came in bad quality, about a customer who's demanding work at rates that don't cover materials. It's shop talk, but it's also intelligence gathering, each trying to extract information from the other without revealing anything useful themselves. The visitor leaves, and the master immediately asks if you heard anything. You lie and say no, you were focused on your work. He grunts, not quite believing you but accepting the answer. Then he launches into an explanation of why you can't trust other masters, even ones who seem friendly. They're all competitors, all looking for advantages, all willing to steal techniques or poach customers or spread rumors that damage reputations. The craft community, he explains, is a network of rivals bound together by guild regulations but fundamentally opposed in their interests. Cooperation is temporary and strategic. Trust is foolish. This worldview is bleak, and you wonder if it's accurate or just the master's personal cynicism. But then you remember the story of the carpenter who got fined for undercutting prices. Someone reported him to the guild, probably another master, possibly one who smiled to his face while documenting his violations. The system encourages this kind of surveillance. It's how quality and standards are supposedly maintained, but it's also how competition is managed and rivals are eliminated. Lunch is interrupted by a customer, a wealthy merchant who wants a custom cabinet with hidden compartments. He's willing to pay premium rates for both the work and the discretion. The master's entire demeanor changes. He becomes obsequious, attentive, eager to please. He listens to the merchant's requirements, asks clarifying questions, and quotes a price that makes your eyes water. The merchant accepts without negotiation, which tells you the master could have charged even more. But greed is tempered by the desire for repeat business. Once the merchant leaves, the master turns to you and Peter with serious expressions. This cabinet project is confidential. The hidden compartments are designed to conceal valuables, possibly legal, possibly not. That's not your concern. Your job is to build what's requested and forget you ever did it. If anyone asks what you're working on, you say it's a standard cabinet. If the merchant's rivals somehow learn about the hidden compartments, the master will know it came from his workshop, and he'll know which apprentices to blame. The threat is implicit but unmistakable. You spend the afternoon working on components for this secret cabinet, and it's genuinely clever design. The hidden compartments aren't obvious. They're built into what appears to be solid panels, accessible through subtle mechanical releases that you'd never find unless you knew where to look. The master shows you how to cut the pieces, how to create false backs and double walls, how to make everything appear normal while concealing substantial storage space. It's carpentry as deception, furniture as conspiracy, and you're complicit in it whether you like it or not. The work requires precision that you're only barely capable of. The tolerances are tight. The hidden doors need to fit flush with their surrounds, invisible to casual inspection. The release mechanisms need to function smoothly but not accidentally. You're cutting dados and rabbits with trembling hands, paranoid about making mistakes that would expose the compartments or make them non-functional. The master checks every piece you produce, testing fits, examining surfaces, looking for flaws that would compromise the illusion. This is when you truly understand what the master meant about secrets. You're not just learning carpentry, you're learning to build things that conceal their true nature, to create furniture that lies about what it is, to participate in the quiet deceptions that wealthy people require. And you're bound by confidentiality that's enforced not by written contracts, but by the implicit threat of professional destruction. If you talk, you're ruined. So you don't talk. You just build and keep your mouth shut and hope that silence is enough to keep you safe. The afternoon wears on with this cabinet work, and you're getting a practical education in how medieval commerce actually functions. The guild maintains public standards and prices, but actual business happens in private negotiations where rules are flexible and relationships matter more than regulations. The master charges different customers different rates based on what he thinks they can pay and how much leverage he has. Some customers get precisely quoted prices that match guild minimums. Others, like this merchant, pay premiums that would violate guild rules if anyone reported them. But nobody reports them, because everyone's doing the same thing and mutual complicity maintains the system. You're cutting another false panel when Willem pulls you aside for what passes as mentorship in this place. He explains, in his usual gruff manner, that you're learning more than carpentry here. You're learning how to navigate a system built on collective dishonesty. The guild pretends to enforce rules that everyone quietly breaks. Masters pretend to treat apprentices as family while extracting maximum labor for minimum investment. Customers pretend to pay fair prices while demanding work that costs more than they're offering. Everyone's lying to everyone else in mutually agreed upon ways, and your job is to learn which lies are acceptable and which ones get you expelled. It's not the inspiring craft education you might have imagined. There's no noble tradition of master passing wisdom to student, no dignified progression from novice to expert. There's just a system of economic relationships dressed up in the language of honor and tradition, where your survival depends on keeping secrets, accepting exploitation, and hoping that someday you'll be the one doing the exploiting. By evening, you've completed several components for the secret cabinet, and the master locks them in a chest to prevent even the other workshop members from seeing the full scope of the project. Peter, the senior apprentice, helps with the locking, and you notice he doesn't seem bothered by any of this. He's been here long enough that the paranoia and secrecy feel normal to him. This is just how things work. You keep secrets, you maintain loyalty, and eventually, maybe you get to run your own shop where you can perpetuate the same system. Dinner is quiet. Nobody discusses what they worked on today. The journeymen talk about a festival coming up, about a girl Willem is trying to court, about anything except the actual work of the workshop. You realize this is intentional. Even among themselves, they maintain compartmentalization, sharing just enough to be collegial but not enough to be vulnerable. Trust is rationed even here, even among people who work side by side every day. You lie on your straw mattress that night thinking about Thomas, the apprentice who lost more than his finger. He lost his reputation, his prospects, his future in the craft, all because he shared information that the guild system demands be kept secret. You think about the cabinet you're building, with its hidden compartments that will conceal things you're better off not knowing about. You think about the master's jig, with its measurements that exist only as marks on wood, designed to be learned but never fully understood. And you realize that you're not really learning a craft. You're being initiated into a conspiracy, a system-wide agreement to control information, limit competition, and maintain the power of those who are already established. The guild calls it preserving quality and tradition. But from here, from your straw mattress with your bleeding hands and your growing understanding of how little any of this has to do with actual woodworking skill, it looks a lot more like organized gatekeeping designed to protect profits and prevent change. Welcome to medieval carpentry, where what you don't say is more important than what you can build. The sun hasn't even considered rising when the master shakes you awake. It's still fully dark outside, the kind of profound darkness that only exists before electricity, and you're being pulled from sleep after maybe 5 hours of rest that your body desperately needed and didn't get enough of. Today is going to be long, the master explains with the enthusiasm of someone describing a funeral. There's a deadline on the merchant's cabinet. A new commission just came in that needs to start immediately, and the parish church has sent word that they need repairs on the choir stalls by Sunday. All of this needs to happen simultaneously, which means everyone works longer, faster, and without the luxury of breaks. You stumble to your feet, and your body provides an immediate inventory of everything that's wrong with it. Your back has progressed from acute pain to a chronic ache that's always present, a bass note underlying everything you do. Your hands have developed calluses, yes, but underneath those calluses are layers of damage. Microtears in tendons, inflammation in joints, a persistent stiffness that makes the first hour of each day an exercise in gradually convincing your fingers to bend properly. Your shoulders have developed knots that feel like someone embedded walnuts under your skin. And you're tired in a way that goes beyond physical exhaustion into something more fundamental, a bone-deep weariness that sleep doesn't fix because you never get enough of it. Breakfast is faster than usual, bread torn and eaten while standing, ale gulped rather than sipped. The master is already assigning tasks before you've finished chewing. Johann and Willem will focus on the church repairs. Peter will continue work on a chest that's been in progress for a week. And you, lucky you, get to spend the day doing the grunt work that enables everyone else's productivity. You're hauling timber, preparing stock, sharpening tools, mixing glue, and generally serving as the workshop's beast of burden. The first task is moving planks from the outdoor drying stack into the workshop. These have been air drying for over a year, and they're needed for the new commission, a large table for a guild hall. The planks are oak naturally because everything important is oak, and each one weighs enough that carrying them solo isn't really feasible. But Peter is busy, the journeymen are busy, and the master expects you to figure it out. So you drag the planks instead of carrying them, one end on the ground, the other end gripped in your aching hands, pulling them across the yard like a peasant hauling a plow. The wood scrapes across the ground, picking up dirt and small stones that embed in the surface. You'll be planing these out later, adding hours to the preparation work, but right now you're just trying to get the planks inside before the master notices how inefficient your method is. Your back screams with each pull, the angle forcing you into a posture that concentrates all the strain on your lower spine. You manage 3 planks before you need to stop and rest, bent over with your hands on your knees, breathing hard in the cold morning air. By the time all 12 planks are inside, the sun has finally risen enough to provide some actual light, and you've worked up a sweat despite the temperature. The master glances at the planks, notices the dirt embedded in them, and sighs. He doesn't say anything, he doesn't need to. His disappointment radiates like heat. You grab a plane and start cleaning the surfaces, shaving off thin layers of wood mixed with dirt, and try not to think about how you've already failed and it's not even mid-morning yet. The workday stretches ahead like a prison sentence. This is what medieval work actually looks like. Not the romantic vision of craftsmen lovingly shaping wood, but the reality of 14-hour days where most of those hours are spent on mind-numbing, back-breaking preparation work that nobody sees or appreciates. For every hour of skilled joinery, there are 5 hours of hauling, planing, sawing, and sanding. For every moment of creative problem-solving, there are days of repetitive motion that turns your brain off and your body into a machine for moving wood from one state to another. You're planing the planks when the customer for the new commission arrives. He's a representative from the guild hall, a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and the attitude of someone who's never done physical labor in his life. He discusses the table specifications with the master. It needs to seat 16 people, it needs to look impressive, and it needs to be done in 3 weeks. The master quotes a price. The customer counters with a lower number. They negotiate like this is a conversation among equals, but everyone in the workshop knows the master needs this commission and the customer knows it too. The final price is lower than the master wanted but higher than the customer hoped. Nobody's happy, but the deal is struck. As soon as the customer leaves, the master's stress cascades down the hierarchy like water flowing downhill. He snaps at Willem about the pace of the church repairs. Willem takes it out on Peter for not organizing tools properly. Peter shoots you a look that says your existence is currently annoying him. Welcome to Trickle-Down Misery, Medieval Edition. The master pulls you off planing duty and assigns you to tool sharpening. Every saw, chisel, plane blade, and knife in the workshop needs to be sharp, and it's a never-ending maintenance task. You set up at the sharpening station, a workbench with several whetstones of different grits, and begin the meditative, mind-numbing work of putting edges on metal. The technique is simple but requires attention. Maintain the correct angle, use even pressure, work through progressively finer stones. Test the edge, repeat until it's sharp enough to shave hair from your arm. You work through the pile of tools and it takes hours. Each chisel needs both the beveled edge and the back flattened. Each plane blade needs to be perfectly straight or the plane won't work properly. The saws need their teeth filed to consistent angles and depths, which requires a specialized file and more patience than you currently possess. Your hands cramp from gripping the tools at constant angles. Your shoulders ache from the repetitive motion. And all the while, you can hear the actual carpentry happening around you. The sound of saws cutting, mallets striking chisels, the master's voice giving instructions, and you're stuck here sharpening tools like some kind of medieval intern who hasn't earned the right to do real work. Lunch comes and goes with barely a pause. You eat your bread while continuing to sharpen, because the master has made it clear that time is tight and no one has the luxury of stopping. The bread is dry and hard to swallow without enough ale to wash it down, and you manage to choke down maybe half of it before your stomach rebels. You're too tired to be hungry anyway, running on some combination of adrenaline and spite. The afternoon brings a new torture: sanding. The planks you planed this morning now need to be sanded smooth, progressing through different grades of abrasive from coarse to fine. Except there's no sandpaper in the medieval workshop. There's just various grades of sandstone, from rough chunks that remove material quickly to fine-grained blocks that polish the surface. You rub these stones across the wood in long, even strokes, and the friction generates heat that makes your hands feel like they're burning. The dust from the sanding mixes with the heat and sweat to form a gritty paste on your palms that works its way into every crack and callus. You sand for 3 hours. 3 hours of repetitive back-and-forth motion that reduces your world to the small section of board in front of you. Your mind tries to wander, to think about anything other than sanding, but the work requires just enough attention to prevent full dissociation. You have to maintain even pressure, follow the grain, check your progress constantly. It's tedious enough to be mind-numbing but demanding enough to prevent escape into thought. It's a special kind of purgatory. Around mid-afternoon, your body starts giving you warning signs that you're approaching some kind of limit. Your vision gets slightly blurry. Your hands start shaking when you try to hold them still. You feel simultaneously hot and cold, feverish but shivering. You mention this to no one because mentioning weakness is how you get labeled as lazy or fragile, and those labels stick. You just keep sanding, keep working, and hope your body doesn't completely mutiny. The master walks by, examines your work, and actually nods approval. The planks are smooth, uniform, ready for joinery. It's the most positive feedback you've gotten all week, and it gives you a small burst of energy that carries you through another hour. But then the master assigns you to the next task, helping Willem with the church repairs, and that energy evaporates immediately. The church work involves replacing several sections of the choir stalls that have been damaged by woodworm. This means cutting out the infested wood, treating the surrounding area with some kind of noxious mixture that supposedly kills the worms, and fitting new pieces that match the existing carving. It's detail work that requires precision, and it needs to happen at the church, which means loading tools and materials into a cart and hauling everything through town to the parish. You and Willem load the cart with saws, chisels, mallets, planes, measuring tools, pieces of pre-cut oak, and the mysterious woodworm treatment that smells like vinegar mixed with death. The cart is heavy, and pulling it through narrow, rutted streets is its own special challenge. The wheels catch on cobblestones. The cart lists sideways on uneven ground. People shout at you to move faster or get out of the way. Willem walks alongside, occasionally helping to push when the cart gets stuck, but mostly just cursing the city, the church, customers in general, and life in particular. The church is cold and drafty, and the choir stalls are in worse condition than the master described. The woodworm damage is extensive, not just a few boards, but entire sections honeycombed with tunnels. This is going to take days, not hours, and everyone knows it except apparently the priest who commissioned the work and wants it done before Sunday, Massachusetts. Willem looks at the damage, looks at you and says, "We're fucked." It's the most honest assessment you've heard all day. You spend the rest of the afternoon cutting out damaged wood. The worm-eaten sections are surprisingly light, hollowed out by generations of larvae eating through the oak. Some pieces crumble when you try to remove them, disintegrating into fragments that smell like musty decay. Other pieces are structurally intact but so compromised that they'll fail under any stress. Everything needs to come out, which means you're essentially rebuilding large sections of these stalls from scratch. Willem applies the woodworm treatment to the remaining wood, brushing it on liberally until the entire area reeks. The smell makes your eyes water and your throat close up. You try breathing through your mouth, but that just means you can taste the stuff. Willem seems unbothered, or at least accustomed to it, working with the same grim efficiency he brings to everything. He's been doing this for years, breathing toxic fumes, handling dangerous tools, working in uncomfortable positions, and his body has either adapted or given up complaining. You're not sure which. By the time you pack up to return to the workshop, it's early evening and you've been working for roughly 13 hours with one brief break for inadequate food. Your body has moved beyond pain into a kind of numb exhaustion where individual discomforts blend into a general sense of physical wrongness. You help Willem pull the cart back through town, and the return journey feels 3 times longer than the trip out. Your legs are shaking. Your vision has dark spots at the edges. You're not entirely certain you're going to make it back to the workshop without collapsing. You do make it somehow, and the workshop is still bustling with activity. Peter is gluing up the chest he's been working on. Johann is doing some kind of detail carving by candlelight. The master is at his bench, making notes about materials and costs, probably calculating whether the guild hall table is going to be profitable or if he's underpriced himself into working at a loss. Dinner is a blur. You eat without tasting. Someone says something that might be a joke, and you hear yourself laugh, but you're not sure why. Your brain has shut down all non-essential functions to conserve energy for the critical task of keeping your body upright. After dinner, you're assigned to sweep the workshop. One last task to cap off this endless day, and you push the broom around in a fog, accomplishing very little beyond redistributing the sawdust. Finally, mercifully, the master declares the workday over. People drift toward their sleeping spots, and you collapse onto your straw mattress with all the grace of a felled tree. Your body sinks into the thin padding like it's the most luxurious bed in existence. Every muscle unclenches simultaneously, and for a moment, the relief is so profound it's almost pleasurable. Then the aches and pains reassert themselves, cataloging the day's damage. New blisters on your hands from pulling the cart, a twisted ankle from stepping wrong on cobblestones, a pulled muscle in your shoulder from some lifting motion you don't even remember. You lie there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the workshop settling, the breathing of other sleepers, the creak of timber, the distant sounds of the city outside. And you think about the fact that you have to do this again tomorrow, and the day after that, and for 6 more days this week, and 50 more weeks this year, and 6 more years after that before your apprenticeship is complete. The math is crushing. The sheer accumulation of days like this one, stretching ahead into a future measured in decades of exhaustion, feels impossible to survive. But medieval apprentices do survive it, most of them anyway. The ones who don't end up like Thomas, or worse, the ones who actually die from accidents or infections or simply giving up. You're surviving, barely, through some combination of stubbornness and lack of alternatives. This is your life now. There's no quitting, no transfer to an easier position, no complaint department. There's just tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, each one as long and brutal as today. You close your eyes and pray for sleep that comes slowly, interrupted by muscle spasms and joint pain and the constant awareness that morning will arrive far too soon. The morning you've been dreading arrives sooner than the one you were hoping for, that morning when your body finally adapts, when the work becomes manageable, when you feel like maybe you're getting the hang of this. Instead, today brings a sharp reminder that medieval workshops are fundamentally dangerous places where a single moment of inattention or bad luck can permanently alter your life. And today, that moment finds you. You're working on the guild hall table, helping the master cut mortises in the massive oak frame pieces. These aren't delicate furniture mortises. They're structural joints for a table that needs to support the weight of 16 seated people plus plates, cups, and the occasional drunk guild member falling against it. The mortises are deep, wide, and require significant force to cut. You're using a heavy mortise chisel and a wooden mallet, striking repeatedly to remove chips of oak that resist every blow like they're personally offended by your attempts to shape them. Your hands are tired. You've been doing this for 2 hours, and the repetitive impact has left your right arm partially numb from shoulder to fingertips. The chisel needs to be repositioned for each strike, held at exactly the right angle, and your grip has started to slip slightly because your palms are sweaty despite the cold. You should stop, rest, let the feeling return to your arm. But the master is watching, the deadline is pressing, and stopping means weakness. You reposition the chisel for another strike. Your grip isn't quite right, you can feel it, but you ignore the warning because you've ignored 100 similar warnings today and nothing bad has happened. You raise the mallet, you swing, and at the moment of impact, the chisel shifts in your slippery grip, your angle is wrong, and instead of driving into the oak, the chisel glances off the edge of the mortise and buries itself in the meat of your left hand, right in the fatty pad below your thumb. The pain is immediate and shocking. Not the dull ache you've become accustomed to, but a sharp, bright agony that makes you gasp and drop both chisel and mallet. Blood wells up instantly, dark red and copious, and you watch with a strange detachment as it runs down your wrist and drips onto the oak, staining the pale wood. For a moment, nobody moves. Then the master is there, grabbing your hand, examining the wound with rough efficiency while you try very hard not to vomit or pass out or both. The cut is deep, you can see layers of tissue, though you're trying very hard not to look too closely, but it hasn't hit anything critical. No severed tendons, no exposed bone, just a nasty laceration that's bleeding enthusiastically and hurts like nothing you've ever experienced. The master wraps your hand tightly in a rag that's probably been used for everything from wiping tools to mopping up spills, applies pressure that makes you see stars, and tells you to hold it elevated while he decides what to do. Here's where you learn about medieval first aid, which is less aid and more hope you don't die from this. The master examines the wound again, determines it needs stitching, and sends Peter to fetch the barber surgeon. Not a doctor, those are for wealthy people with complicated ailments. A barber surgeon, who performs haircuts, tooth extractions, minor surgeries, and occasional amputations in the same shop with the same basic tools. You've seen his premises during your trips through town. A small storefront with a striped pole outside and a window display featuring a jar of leeches and several terrifyingly crude surgical implements. While you wait, Willem provides his medical expertise, which consists entirely of stories about other workshop injuries he's witnessed. There was an apprentice who lost 3 fingers to a saw, a journeyman who took a chisel through his foot and walked with a limp forever after, old Matthias who got oak splinters so deep in his arm they festered until the limb swelled up black and had to be removed at the shoulder. These stories are apparently meant to be comforting. See, you're not dying, this is barely worth mentioning. But they mostly just make you lightheaded. The barber surgeon arrives after what feels like hours, but is probably 30 minutes. He's a middle-aged man with blood-stained cuffs and the casual confidence of someone who's seen worse than your hand today and will see worse again tomorrow. He unwraps the rag, examines the wound with fingers that you desperately hope are clean but probably aren't, and announces that yes, it needs stitching, and yes, it's going to hurt. He produces a curved needle already threaded with what looks like thin twine but is probably catgut, actual gut from an actual cat or sheep, processed into suture material. There's no anesthetic, no numbing agent, no pain relief of any kind except the strong ale the master offers you. You drink it quickly, hoping alcohol will dull what's coming, but the amount you can consume in the available time barely takes the edge off your awareness. The barber surgeon tells you to look away. You don't. Some masochistic part of you needs to witness this, to see the needle pierce your skin, to watch the thread pull through your flesh, to know exactly what's happening even though knowing makes it worse. The first stitch is agony. A sharp, precise pain followed by the strange tugging sensation of thread being pulled tight through living tissue. You make a sound you're not proud of, something between a whimper and a grunt, and your free hand grips the workbench hard enough that your knuckles go white. The barber surgeon works quickly, efficiently, without sympathy or commentary. He's stitching meat, not comforting patients, and he's done this 1,000 times. 5 stitches total, each one a fresh spike of pain that makes the previous one seem almost tolerable in retrospect. By the 5th stitch, you're sweating and shaking, teeth clenched so hard your jaw aches, breathing in short, sharp gasps that do nothing to alleviate the nausea rolling through your stomach. Finished, the barber surgeon ties off the thread, cuts it with a small knife that looks like it's been used for everything from surgery to eating, and wraps your hand in a strip of linen that might once have been clean. He gives the master a list of instructions. Keep it wrapped, change the dressing daily, watch for signs of infection, heat, redness spreading from the wound, pus, fever. If you see those signs, come back immediately, and he'll do what he can. The phrase hangs ominously, with the implication that what he can do might involve removing parts of your hand. The cost for this medical intervention is subtracted from your future wages, or rather, from the theoretical wages you'll earn someday when you're a journeyman, because apprentices don't get paid except in room and board. You've just gone into debt for the privilege of having your hand stitched after injuring yourself doing the master's work. The injustice of this barely registers through the pain. The barber surgeon leaves, and you're left standing there with your throbbing, wrapped hand and the dawning realization that you still have to work. The master gives you 10 minutes to collect yourself, which is generous by his standards, and then assigns you to tasks that can be done one-handed. Sweeping, sorting, organizing, the mindless labor that the workshop always needs and nobody wants to do. You sweep with your good hand, and every motion sends sympathetic jolts of pain through your injured hand because apparently your body doesn't understand that not all parts need to hurt simultaneously. The day continues in a haze of pain and diminished capacity. You can't grip tools properly, can't apply force, can't do any of the skilled work you've been slowly learning. You're reduced to being furniture, the thing that holds boards steady while others cut them, the body that occupies space and occasionally moves objects from point A to point B. It's humbling and frustrating and terrifying because you're getting a preview of what life would be like with a permanent disability, and you're seeing how little sympathy the workshop has for people who can't produce. Historians still argue whether medieval workers had better or worse outcomes from workplace injuries compared to later industrial periods. But from your position here, bleeding through your bandage and trying to be useful with one functional hand, the answer seems pretty clear. Medieval medicine is barely better than no medicine at all, and your survival depends more on luck and your immune system than any intervention the barber surgeon provided. By afternoon, the wound has soaked through the bandage. You show it to the master, who unwraps it, examines the stitches, and determines that it's bleeding but not hemorrhaging. Normal, apparently, for the first day. He wraps it again, tighter this time, and tells you to keep working. So you do, because what else is there? You sweep. You organize. You fetch things for people who have two functional hands and can actually accomplish something. Evening brings inspection time. The master unwraps your hand again, and you both examine the wound in the dying light. The stitches are holding, black thread stark against red flesh. The area around the wound is swollen and angry, but not yet showing the red streaks that would indicate spreading infection. It hurts constantly now, a deep throbbing ache that pulses with your heartbeat, but that's apparently normal too. Everything about this is normal. Workplace injuries are so common they're barely worth discussing except as cautionary tales to make apprentices more careful. The master gives you a speech about attention and focus, about how the workshop is dangerous and complacency kills. He's not angry exactly, more resigned. This is what happens with apprentices. They hurt themselves. It's part of the process. The ones who survive and learn become careful craftsmen. The ones who don't survive become warnings to the next batch. You're currently in the middle category. Injured but alive, learning the hard way that every moment of inattention carries consequences. You eat dinner with your hand elevated, trying to reduce the throbbing by keeping it above your heart like the barber surgeon instructed. The food is tasteless, your body is too focused on processing pain to bother with flavor, but you eat anyway because you need energy to heal. The other workshop members offer perfunctory sympathy but mostly just seem relieved it wasn't them. Willem tells you his story of getting a chisel through his hand 15 years ago. Johann mentions an infection he had that required lancing. Even Peter has an injury tale, though his is less dramatic, just a badly broken finger that healed crooked. These stories are meant to normalize your experience, to welcome you into the club of people who've bled for their craft, but they mostly just reinforce how dangerous this work is and how inadequate the medical response. Every person in this workshop carries scars from their work. Every one of them has lost blood, suffered infections, endured injuries that modern workers would file disability claims over. And they all just accept it as the cost of the trade, the price you pay for the privilege of working with your hands. That night, sleep is difficult. The pain keeps you awake, a constant presence that won't let you sink into unconsciousness. When you do manage to drift off, you wake up moments later because you've rolled onto your injured hand or because a muscle spasm has pulled at the stitches. By morning, you're exhausted in a new way. Not the physical exhaustion of labor, but the deeper weariness that comes from pain-interrupted sleep and the knowledge that today will be no easier than yesterday. The wound continues to dominate your existence over the next week. You change the dressing daily, watching anxiously for signs of infection. You work one-handed, struggling with tasks that should be simple. The stitches itch madly as they heal, and you're not supposed to scratch, but the temptation is overwhelming. You resist mostly because the alternative is tearing the wound open again and starting this whole nightmare over. 7 days after the injury, the barber surgeon returns to remove the stitches. This is almost as bad as getting them put in. Each stitch needs to be cut and pulled out, and the sensation of thread sliding through partially healed tissue makes you want to scream. But you don't scream. You've learned that lesson. You just grip the workbench and endure, because enduring is what apprentices do. The wound leaves a scar, a crescent-shaped mark on your hand that will fade over time but never disappear completely. It joins the collection of smaller scars you've accumulated, cuts from sharp edges, burns from hot tools, calluses so thick they're practically armor. Your hands are transforming, becoming the hands of a carpenter, shaped by the work they do and marked by the price that work extracts. You return to full duty with your hands still tender but functional. The scar pulls slightly when you grip tools, a reminder to be careful, to pay attention, to never take your safety for granted. You've learned what medieval craftsmen all know. The workshop is not your friend. Tools do not forgive mistakes, and your body is fragile in ways you never appreciated until pieces of it stopped working properly. Welcome to medieval carpentry, where the work doesn't just teach you a trade. It writes its lessons directly into your flesh. 6 months into your apprenticeship, you've developed a perspective that would be impossible to explain to your past self. The person who walked into this workshop thinking they could handle physical labor because they'd moved apartments once or carried groceries upstairs. That person was an idiot. That person had no concept of what sustained manual labor actually means, what it does to your body over weeks and months, how it grinds you down in ways that are both physical and existential. Your hands have transformed completely. The blisters have been replaced by calluses so thick you could probably grip hot coals without flinching. Your fingers have permanent dirt under the nails that no amount of scrubbing removes. The scar from your chisel accident is a pale crescent that pulls slightly when you flex your thumb, a permanent reminder written in your own tissue. Your shoulders have broadened from constant lifting and pulling. Your forearms have developed muscles you didn't know existed, ropes of sinew that stand out when you grip tools. You're stronger than you've ever been in your life, and also more broken, more worn down, more aware of your body's limitations and the inevitability of its failure. The work has become almost routine, which is perhaps the most depressing development of all. You can cut mortises without thinking about it, your hands knowing the angle and depth through pure repetition. You can sharpen tools by feel, sensing when the edge is right through some combination of sound and resistance. You can identify wood types by smell and grain pattern, tell oak from ash from beech at a glance. These are real skills, genuinely useful knowledge, and they mean absolutely nothing in terms of improving your quality of life. You're still sleeping on a straw mattress. You're still eating bread that could substitute for building materials. You're still working 14-hour days, 6 days a week, with Sunday offering only slightly less labor disguised as religious obligation. The master has started trusting you with more complex work, which sounds like progress until you realize it just means more responsibility without any increase in compensation or autonomy. You're cutting joinery for customer projects now, and if you mess up, you're wasting expensive materials and losing the master money. The pressure is constant. Every cut matters. Every joint needs to be perfect. And you're doing this with hands that still hurt from yesterday's work, with a back that never quite stops aching, with a mind that's so dulled by routine that it sometimes takes conscious effort to maintain the focus this precision requires. The other apprentices and journeymen have become familiar to the point of contempt. Peter, the senior apprentice, has revealed himself to be profoundly mediocre at carpentry but excellent at office politics. He's mastered the art of appearing busy while doing minimal actual work, and he's cultivated a relationship with the master based on strategic sycophancy. Johann still smells like onions and has the personality of a damp plank, but he's a genuinely skilled craftsman whose hands can coax beauty out of wood even while his mouth complains about everything. Willem remains the gruff quasi-mentor who dispenses advice through insults and criticism, teaching you more than he probably intends through sheer exposure to his methods. The master himself has gone from terrifying authority figure to merely exhausting boss. You've learned to read his moods, to know when to ask questions and when to stay silent, to predict what he'll criticize before he criticizes it. He's not evil, exactly. He's just a product of a system that encourages exploitation and calls it education. He works long hours himself, stresses about money constantly, and bears the weight of keeping the workshop profitable in a competitive market governed by arbitrary guild rules. He's both oppressor and victim, crushing you beneath him while being crushed by forces above him. Understanding this doesn't make you hate him less. It just makes the hate more complicated. The economics of your situation have become clearer over these months, and they're bleak. You're producing value, significant value, in the form of furniture and joinery that customers pay good money for, but you're receiving essentially nothing in return beyond subsistence-level food and shelter. The master's calculation is simple. Your labor costs him maybe a penny per day in food, and you're producing work worth 10 times that. The profit margin on apprentice labor is extraordinary, which is why the guild limits how many apprentices each master can have. Otherwise, masters would just load up on apprentices and undercut each other with cheaply produced goods. You've also learned that your 7-year apprenticeship is just the beginning of a much longer journey to economic independence. After your apprenticeship ends, you become a journeyman, a craftsman who works for wages but doesn't own a shop. Journeyman wages are better than apprentice wages, which is to say they exist, but they're not enough to save meaningful money. You'll work as a journeyman for years, maybe a decade, before you've accumulated enough capital to buy tools, rent a shop, and apply for guild membership. And guild membership itself costs a substantial fee, plus you need to produce a masterpiece, a demonstration project that proves your skill, which requires materials you have to buy yourself. The math is crushing. If you start your apprenticeship at 14 and complete it at 21, then work as a journeyman until you're 30 or 35, you might be able to open your own shop, by which point you'll be middle-aged by medieval standards, your body already damaged by 2 decades of hard labor, and you'll get maybe 10 or 15 years of actually profiting from your own work before age and injury force you to slow down. The system is designed to extract maximum value from your youth and strength while providing minimal compensation, and there's no way out except through. The realization that hits you hardest somewhere around month 6 is that you're not learning a craft, you're being broken in like a horse being trained to accept a saddle. The actual carpentry skills are secondary to the primary lesson, which is obedience, endurance, acceptance of hierarchy, and tolerance for suffering. You're learning to show up before dawn without complaint. You're learning to work through pain and exhaustion. You're learning to accept minimal compensation as fair. You're learning to be grateful for scraps of approval from people who profit from your labor. And it's working. You can feel it working. 6 months ago, you would have found the conditions intolerable and walked away. Now you're numb to them. The 14-hour days feel normal. The terrible food feels adequate. The workshop's dangers feel manageable. You've been gradually recalibrated to accept as normal what you previously would have recognized as exploitation. This is what the apprenticeship system actually does. It doesn't create skilled craftsmen. It creates people who've been conditioned to accept poor treatment and call it tradition. Your body carries the evidence of this conditioning. Beyond the obvious muscle development and calluses, there are the chronic problems that are already developing. Your knees click when you stand up from crouching positions, the cartilage already damaged by hours spent kneeling while working on low pieces. Your lower back has a constant low-level ache that occasionally spikes into acute pain when you twist wrong or lift something heavy. Your hearing has been damaged by months of working near constant hammering and sawing. There's a faint ringing in your ears that never quite goes away. Your lungs have adapted to breathing sawdust, which probably means they're developing the scarring that will eventually become the chronic cough that kills old carpenters. The social isolation is perhaps worse than the physical damage. You have no friends outside the workshop because you're never outside the workshop. Your entire social world consists of the master and the few other people who work here, and those relationships are fundamentally transactional. Peter isn't your friend. He's your rival for the master's approval. Johann and Willem aren't mentors. They're co-workers with slightly more seniority who tolerate your presence because the hierarchy demands it. The master isn't a father figure. He's your employer who's legally allowed to beat you if he decides you need it. There's no romance, no social life, no leisure activities beyond the occasional festival that the workshop gets half a day off to attend. You're 19 or whatever age you are, and you should be in the prime of your life, figuring out who you are, making mistakes, having experiences. Instead, you're in a workshop making mortise and tenon joints, breathing toxic fumes, and counting down the years until you're released from a contract you didn't fully understand when you signed it. The guild system that governs all of this presents itself as a benevolent organization protecting craft quality and worker welfare, but you've seen how it actually functions. It's a cartel that limits competition, maintains artificially high prices, and ensures that wealth and power stay concentrated in the hands of established masters. The guilds talk about brotherhood and tradition while operating mechanisms of exclusion and exploitation that keep most workers permanently subordinate. You either succeed in climbing the ladder, which requires luck, connections, and surviving long enough, or you remain at the bottom, doing skilled work for subsistence wages while others profit from your labor. And if you complain, if you question the system, there's no mechanism for that. The guild regulates disputes between masters, not between masters and apprentices. Apprentices have no representation, no voice, no power except the nuclear option of running away, which makes you a fugitive, ruins your reputation, and ensures you'll never work in the craft again. You're trapped in a system that was designed to trap you, and everyone pretends it's for your own benefit, this education through suffering. 6 months in, you understand why some apprentices fail. Not because they can't learn the skills are actually learnable given enough time and repetition, but because they can't accept the existential reality of what this life is. They look ahead and see decades of subordination, see their youth being consumed for someone else's profit, see their bodies being destroyed for someone else's convenience, and they choose to escape even if escape means failure. You haven't made that choice yet. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll endure all 7 years, emerge as a journeyman, work another decade, eventually open your own shop, and finally get to exploit some other young person the way you've been exploited. Maybe that's success. Or maybe success is just surviving, making it through each day without major injury or total despair, collecting skills and scars in equal measure, and hoping that someday the balance tips towards something resembling autonomy. You're building furniture, yes, but more fundamentally, you're building a version of yourself that can tolerate intolerable conditions, that can find meaning in meaningless repetition, that can look at a life of hard labor and inadequate compensation and call it a career. Your modern self, the person who had options, who could quit jobs, who had labor laws and workplace protections and the luxury of thinking work should be fulfilling, that person is gone. In their place is someone harder, more resigned, more adapted to a world where survival is the victory and dignity is a luxury you can't afford. You've learned to make perfect joints in wood while your own life is held together with increasingly fragile connections to hope and purpose. The master calls you over to examine a piece you've been working on, a drawer front with delicate dovetails. He inspects it carefully, checking the fit, looking for gaps. He finds a tiny imperfection, less than a millimeter of gap, and points it out. Better, he says, which is as close to praise as he gets. But still not good enough. He hands it back for you to fix, and you take it without comment because arguing accomplishes nothing. You return to your workbench, examine the joint, make the necessary adjustment. The work continues. It always continues. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, more cutting, more fitting, more grinding repetition punctuated by moments of acute danger and chronic discomfort. And you'll do it because you've been trained to do it, because you've invested too much suffering to quit now, because there's no alternative that doesn't involve different but equally bleak prospects. This is medieval carpentry, not the romantic craft of master artisans lovingly shaping wood, but the reality of young people being systematically exploited in a system that presents exploitation as education. You wouldn't last a day in this workshop, not the original you anyway, but the person you've become, shaped by months of suffering and adaptation, can last indefinitely. Whether that's an achievement or a tragedy is a question you've learned not to ask, because the answer doesn't change anything. The light is fading. Another day almost done. You keep working by candlelight, finishing the drawer front, making it perfect because perfect is the only acceptable standard. Your hands move automatically, guided by muscle memory and hard-won skill. Your mind drifts, thinking about nothing in particular, because thinking too much about your situation leads nowhere productive. You're surviving. In a medieval carpenter's workshop, that counts as success. Your modern complaints about work, that it's boring, that your boss is annoying, that you're underpaid, that meetings are pointless, seem laughably trivial from here. At least modern workers aren't legally bound to their employers. At least workplace injuries trigger investigations rather than shrugs. At least there's some theoretical path between effort and reward that doesn't require decades of subordination first. But here, now, in this workshop with sawdust in your lungs and calluses on your hands and years of the stretching ahead, you understand something fundamental. Work has always been hard, systems have always been rigged, and the people doing the actual labor have always gotten the smallest share of the value they create. The tools and techniques change. The exploitation remains constant. You're just experiencing a medieval version of something that persists, in different forms, into whatever time you came from. The master announces the day is done. You set down your tools, sweep your area, and shuffle toward your straw mattress with the grim satisfaction of someone who's survived another day. Tomorrow will come too soon. The work will continue, and you'll endure because enduring is what you've learned to do. And now, as the workshop falls quiet and the candles burn low, let your mind drift away from this world of sawdust and suffering. You've walked through these months of medieval labor, felt the weight of tools in damaged hands, breathed the thick air of glue and wood dust, and learned that survival itself can be a kind of victory, even when the cost is everything else. The workshop fades now, its sounds growing distant, the rasp of saws becoming softer, the hammer strikes becoming echoes, until all you hear is your own breathing, slow and steady. Your hands, wherever you are now, are whole and comfortable. Your back doesn't ache. The air is clean. You're safe, warm, and free from that endless cycle of labor. Let the medieval world slip away completely, like a dream you're forgetting upon waking, until all that remains is the comfort of where you actually are. Soft blankets, a real bed, the luxury of rest without injury or exhaustion. The past is past. The workshop is gone. There's only this moment, this peace, this gentle drift into sleep. Rest now. You've earned it.